Ever find yourself wondering what really makes people successful? I mean, like, what's the real secret sauce?
It's a question that we probably all ask ourselves at some point.
Right. And today on the deep dive, we're going deep on this, exploring some really interesting ideas based on what you, the listeners, sent us.
Yeah, we had some great suggestions.
We did, and especially this book, Give and Take by Adam Grant. It's got some seriously thought-provoking stuff. Like, you know how we usually think of success?
Uh-huh.
It's all about, like, climbing that ladder, being super competitive.
Right, it's like a battle to the top, looking out for number one.
Exactly. Like, you got to be tough, even a little ruthless, maybe, to get ahead. And haven't we all heard that, givers are kind of the weak ones?
Yeah, Laszlo Box from Google even said that. That idea that givers finish last, while takers, the ones who prioritize their own needs, they're the strong ones. It's a pretty common belief.
Totally. So, for this deep dive, we really want to unpack that, see if it's actually true.
Yeah, we're going to explore the different ways we approach interactions, as givers, takers, and the ones in the middle, matchers, and how those play out in our work, our lives, pretty much everything. And we'll use real examples and research to see who really comes out on top, and more importantly, why.
Absolutely. And this isn't just some fluffy feel-good stuff. We're digging into a book that's rooted in positive psychology.
Which, to put it simply, looks at what makes people thrive, what helps us be our best in different settings. Like the workplace is a big one.
For sure. And it also touches on organizational behavior, so we're dealing with real studies and findings. Okay, so right off the bat, something that really jumped out at me was this weird thing about givers. It's almost a paradox.
Yeah, it's this initial puzzle. We see givers at both extremes of the success spectrum.
It's like they're at the bottom, struggling.
But then tons of them are right there at the very top, too.
Yeah, totally. Like the book mentions these medical students in Belgium, the ones with the absolute lowest grades, they scored really high on giver statements. Stuff like, I really enjoy helping others.
Hmm.
But here's the kicker. The students with the highest grades, they also had those super high giver scores. It's like, what's going on there?
So you see this in other areas as well. There was a study of salespeople in North Carolina, the least productive ones. They had way higher giver scores than your average salesperson.
Huh. Why is that?
It seems like they were so focused on doing right by the customer that they were almost hesitant to, like, push for the sale.
Makes sense. They're putting the client first.
Yeah, maybe even at the expense of their own targets. But, and this is where it gets interesting, the most productive salespeople, you guessed it, they were also givers.
No way.
And not just by a bit. On average, they brought in 50% more revenue per year compared to the takers and matches at the bottom. That's a huge difference.
Wow, that's wild. So how can the same tendency, being a giver, lead to such completely opposite results?
Right. So to understand this, the book breaks down these three main reciprocity styles. First, we've got the takers.
Okay, so who are the takers exactly?
Well, as the book describes them, they're the ones who are basically trying to get more than they give, always tilting the scales in their favor. And they kind of see the world as a competition. You got to get yours.
Dog eat dog world, that kind of thing.
Yeah, their main focus is always what's in it for me. The example with David Hornick and Danny Shader shows this really well. Shader was worried that Hornick, because he seemed so supportive and generous, wouldn't be tough enough as an investor.
Oh, interesting. So he thought Hornick was too nice.
Exactly. He thought maybe Hornick would spend more time encouraging him than really challenging him, giving him the hard truths a new business needs to hear.
Yeah, I get it. And the book says a taker in Hornick's shoes would have probably given Shader a really tight deadline just to get the investment locked down, whether Shader was ready or not.
Right. Then we kind of have Madgers lurking in the background, not fully explained yet at this point in the book, but they're there. They're the ones who try to keep things balanced. I'll help you if you help me. Fair's fair.
Makes sense. Tit for tat.
Yep. And then we have our givers, of course, the ones whose whole deal we're trying to figure out here.
So how does the book define a giver at this stage?
Givers are the people who genuinely enjoy helping others. They're always looking for ways to help and anticipate what others need. It's just how they roll.
Okay, I see. So three very different styles. Now, why do some givers end up struggling, becoming what the book calls chumps?
Well, this is where it gets tricky. It shows the dangers of giving without setting any boundaries. Remember those medical students? They were so busy helping their classmates study that they kind of forgot about their own learning.
They gave away their time and energy, hurt themselves in the process.
Exactly. And the salespeople, same thing. They wanted to do what was best for the customer so much that they weren't assertive enough. Probably lost some deals because of it.
Classic case of being too nice, backfiring, right?
Yeah. But here's the flip side, and this is really cool. How givers can also reach the top, become champs.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The California engineering study was a great example. The ones who were the most productive, getting the most done, and doing it well, They were the ones who consistently gave more to their colleagues than they got in return.
Whoa, so it's not all about being cutthroat then?
It seems generosity can actually drive success.
That's pretty amazing.
And this isn't just a fluke. The book points out that this pattern shows up everywhere. The top medical students, the most successful salespeople, they were all givers too.
So it sounds like giving in its pure form can be a bit of a gamble.
You could say that.
Without being smart about it, it can lead to being used and taken advantage of. But when you use it the right way,
It becomes this huge strength. Being a giver doesn't automatically mean you're going to fail. There's a way to become a champ, not just a chump.
that's really encouraging. Speaking of long-term benefits, what about reputation? Remember David Hornick, the guy who Shader initially thought was too nice?
Oh yeah?
Well, it wasn't the end of their story, was it?
Nope. The amazing thing is, even though Shader went with a different investor, he came to really respect Hornick's dedication. That initial willingness to give, even though it didn't lead to an immediate payoff, it built something. Shader started connecting Hornick with other investment opportunities.
Wow, so it paid off in the end.
It did, big time. Hornick ended up investing in Rocket Lawyer, even though they had another offer on the table. It's a perfect example of how having that reputation for being a giver, a straight shooter, opens doors.
You never know what might come back around, huh?
Absolutely. And get this, Hornick's success rate in securing investments is like 89%,
Seriously, that's insane.
compared to the industry average, which is only around 50%. And he says a lot of that is because of his giver approach. People trust him, want to work with him.
That's incredible.
And there's this historical example, too, Senator Sampson and Lyman Trumbull. Years before, Sampson stepped aside so Trumbull could win a Senate seat.
What a nice guy.
Right. And even though Sampson lost a bunch of races after that, Trumbull became one of his biggest supporters. Even a former rival, Norman Judd, backed Sampson because of that early act of generosity.
It's amazing how much goodwill that one act created.
It shows you sometimes it's not about the instant reward.
Totally. So how is the modern workplace, like how we work now, impacting this whole thing?
Well, one thing is the rise of teamwork. So many projects now rely on collaboration. And guess what? Teams do best when people are willing to share information, step up, and help each other out. Givers are naturally good at that stuff.
Makes total sense. In a team setting, if everyone's just trying to take, nothing gets done.
You got it. And remember Abraham Lincoln.
Honest Abe.
Yeah, he brought his rivals into his cabinet. These were guys who had ripped him apart before. Edwin Stanton, for example, once called Lincoln a gawky, long-armed ape. Brutal. But working with Lincoln, seeing his genuine commitment to doing good, changed their minds completely. Stanton ended up calling Lincoln the most perfect ruler of men the world has ever seen. Total turnaround.
Wow, so givers can actually prove themselves within a team, earn respect and loyalty.
Yeah, actions speak louder than words. But the book also points out the risks of being a giver. How do successful givers avoid those pitfalls?
Good question.
Well, that's where being an otherish giver comes in. Good givers aren't just blindly selfless, sacrificing themselves all the time. They find a balance between being generous and protecting themselves. Peter Audit, this financial advisor in Australia, is a good example. He got taken advantage of early on, but he learned to give in a way that still helped his firm succeed.
So the key difference between a chump giver and a champ giver.
Is knowing when to give and when to hold back. Being eartherish.
I like that. And Audit even said, there's no doubt that I've succeeded in business because I give to other people. It's my weapon of choice.
He knew the power of giving, but he used it strategically.
Smart. So what drives givers and takers deep down?
The book talks about their values. Takers often prioritize wealth, power, winning, things like that. Givers, on the other hand, care more about helping, responsibility, social justice, compassion.
So takers are often in it for themselves while givers are looking out for others.
In a nutshell, yeah. But that doesn't mean givers can't be successful in the traditional sense.
Right, we've seen that.
And they can be strategic about it, too. Like David Hornick, with The Lobby Conference, he invited all these other venture capitalists.
Wasn't that risky, helping out the competition?
Yeah, some people thought so. But Hornick wanted to create something good for everyone involved, not just focus on his own immediate gain. He figured fostering a collaborative environment would benefit everyone in the long run, even if one competitor didn't return the favor later on.
It's that abundance mindset.
Right. Make the pie bigger, everyone gets a slice.
I love that. But let's be real, not everyone who seems generous actually is. What about the takers in disguise?
The fakers. This is where you got to be careful. These are people like Ken Lay, Enron. He was charming, seemed likable, but underneath it was all about taking more than giving.
And he definitely did that, using company money for personal stuff, his family making bank off Enron deals, selling off his stock right before everything crashed.
And there's this quote from his old boss warning that he was maybe too ambitious. Looking back, that's pretty spot on.
Wow, that's eerie. So how did he get so successful in the first place?
Well, he was a master networker, knew how to use his connections, starting way back with his economics professor, Pinckney Walker. Get Lay some sweet gigs.
So he used people to climb the ladder.
Yeah, even while he was pulling all those shady moves. Shows you can't just go by appearances.
For sure. Any tips on how to spot these fakers?
The book mentions some interesting research. They studied CEOs in the computer industry, the ones who were seen as hardcore takers. They used a lot more first-person singular pronouns. I, me, mine,
Interesting. So it's all about me, myself, and I.
basically, instead of focusing on we and the team. Could be a subtle red flag.
Now, the book also talks about how technology has changed the whole reputation game. Back in the day, when communities were smaller, everyone knew everyone. Reputations was super visible. It was harder for takers to hide their true colors.
Right. Word got around fast.
Exactly. But now, with the internet, social media, people are more spread out. It's easier to stay anonymous. Someone like Ken Lay could jump between groups. His past wouldn't necessarily follow him.
Yeah, it's easier to keep things under wraps.
Makes sense. So let's talk about someone who's used generosity to build a killer network, Adam Rifkin. This guy had more LinkedIn connections to Fortune's most powerful people than anyone else on the planet.
That's crazy.
It is, and he built this massive network by being a giver. He's all about doing small, kind things every day, genuinely wanting to help the people he's connected with.
He's been a big part of online communities for ages, always trying to make connections stronger, helping people out.
He even co-founded a company that grew to have, like, hundreds of millions of users.
Whoa.
I know. But he shut it down because he felt it wasn't really making a difference in people's lives.
He wanted to do something meaningful.
Exactly. Then he became the super giver, advising startups, connecting people in his network. And get this, he had this Green Day fan site. The band's management asked him for it, and he just gave it to them.
Wow, just like that.
No strings attached. And that one random act of kindness, helping this punk rock fan, Graham Spencer, led to a connection with the founder of Excite. Crazy, right?
Totally. It shows you being a giver can open doors you never even knew existed. You just got to put good stuff out there.
Exactly. The book also talks about dormant ties. These are people you haven't talked to in a while. Research shows that reconnecting with them can be super valuable.
Really. You'd think your closest, most active connections would be the most useful.
I know, right? But turns out those old, less used connections have tons of untapped potential. And apparently, the older you get, the more this is true.
Interesting.
And guess who has an advantage here? Givers.
Makes sense.
Takers, they might find people are hesitant to help them, maybe even suspicious. But givers, because they've built up that goodwill, they're much more likely to get a positive response.
It's all about that karma, right?
Kind of. The book uses this cool metaphor. Givers are like suns, injecting energy, creating opportunities, while takers are like black holes, sucking the energy out of everything.
I love that.
And the story of Adam Rifkin and Raymond Roof really shows this. Roof was this struggling entrepreneur, and Rifkin stepped in, gave advice, made introductions.
What happened?
Roof ended up getting funding for his company, Graph Science, and it became a huge success. He even says it wouldn't have happened without Rifkin's help.
Wow, that's awesome.
It is. And then there's Rifkin's 5-minute favor concept. Small acts of generosity that make a big difference for others but don't take much effort from the giver, like giving feedback or making a quick introduction.
So simple, but so powerful.
Right, like Stephanie, the LinkedIn recruiter. She met Rifkin once, he gave her some advice and job leads, and it completely changed her career.
That's so cool. It really shows how little things can have a huge impact.
Totally. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for you?
Well, this idea that you got to be a taker to be successful, clearly not true. Research shows that givers can reach the top by building relationships, being good people, and staying open to the opportunities that come from being generous.
It really flips the script on that dog-eat-dog mentality, doesn't it? Helping others isn't just a nice thing to do. It can be a huge advantage in the long run.
Totally. But you got to be smart about it.
Yeah, we've seen that.
The difference between givers, takers, and matchers, and watching out for those fakers, is key. Being generous is great, but you got to protect yourself too.
Definitely. Hopefully this deep dive has given everyone listening a new way to think about success. It's not as simple as being nice or tough. There's a lot more to it.
It really makes you think about the people in your own life, right? How does reciprocity play out in your everyday interactions? Are there any 5-minute favors you could do for someone? You never know what kind of ripple effect it might create for them and for you.
That's such a good point. And as always, this is just the start of the conversation. There's so much more to explore about this whole giving and taking thing.
It's a fascinating topic.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone.